My name's Steve Grigg. I'm president of Republic Properties Corporation. With me today is my partner, Brad Colburn, who's head of acquisitions and investments at Republic.
Brad Colburn, partner at Republic Properties Corporation. We're sitting here in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters office, talking with CrowdStreet. Introduction from a local source here. We sat down with David in the building next door and had to talk about the premise and the opportunities available through CrowdStreet and put it to work. In terms of being skeptical, I think you always want to understand a process. It's investing, and so it's important to know that the beginning and the end and everything in the middle, right? Because we respond to these investments, and we want them to work, and we want them to be structured appropriately. So there's a whole risk mitigation in terms of what is CrowdStreet offering? Does it work? Who have they done it with? How long does the process take? What do the documents entail? And how do we fit into that, right? Maybe we have something that's good for that kind of synergy, or maybe we don't.
I think the questions that I had to do with what's the relationship between the investors and ourselves. How are their objectives and our objectives going to mesh? And then how does CrowdStreet fit within that process of putting us together with those investors and assisting in the relationship between ourselves and those investors? I think we were surprised by the level of due diligence that CrowdStreet had to begin with. We found it pretty thorough. I think a little surprised with how quickly the audio-visual sort of event of presenting the investment occurred after, and then the process of just kind of putting things together. After that, it was really pretty straightforward. We established a pretty rigorous, we're used to dealing with investors and institutional investors who want periodic reports. And so there really wasn't much difference between that and the way we interfaced. It morphed over a period of time in terms of the way CrowdStreet's has a very diverse system of getting feedback from the investors. And so that sort of morphed depending on what was happening. But I don't think there were as many surprises down the road, but it was interesting to see how it sort of came together in the front of it.
I would add that it worked. And so, the reporting and using the portal to access the investors and they to access us seems to have provided an appropriate kind of two-way street. Every investment's different. Commercial real estate investing is so non-standardized. You really have to focus on the process. And so Steve mentioned the diligent underwriting. From our side, presenting it to you all and from CrowdStreet and validating it independent of us, I think reminded me of any prior investment process that we've done.
I think the advantage of the CrowdStreet process is it's faster than institutional investing, which was a little bit longer and more cumbersome. But in terms of the process, as Brad said, the same diligence materials and the same questions were answered. They were just done in a more straightforward fashion, which I think is pretty efficient. Efficiency is rewarded.
Yeah, you can be diligent and timely, and that was an advantage.
If it's not unprecedented, it's certainly an unusual period of kind of long-term growth. Long cycles usually have harder corrections over a period of time. So it's difficult to look at those in a balanced way where you're right close to them. I guess I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and the recycling that we've done in the last in the last 2 years has been probably as brutal as when prime rates were 21%. So there were a lot of changes that have occurred over this period of time. But uh, coming out of this cycle, I think you're going to see a return to fundamentals and a return to growth that will be um, not as spectacular, but certainly one that should be more predictable. And I think we're going to return to that in the beginning of this next cycle. Um, and that really is probably a better place for a lot of people to be investing than in much more riskier um, and cyclical investments. Uh, so that's sort of my long view of it.
Now, I generally agree. Every cycle has its correction. There is a return to fundamentals. There was a return to simplicity, um, straightforward underwriting, lending standards constrict, and then ultimately kind of ease over time as people gain comfort. So I think we're about to embark on that, and that'll be good for everybody, investors, sponsors like ourselves, lenders, um, make for a better construct. We try to cover a broad base of markets. We did a whole basket of value add apartment investing, multifamily investing, and we can cycle back to that. The nature of how we execute on that will be a little bit different. We'll be focused on kind of newer built product as opposed to maybe some of the older 60s or 70s or 80s product. We'd rather be kind of year 2000 or newer. We know how to build, ground up apartments, office buildings, things like that. So we'll focus on that to some degree. We like core plus investing, which is basically something just a little older than brand new.
As things move along right now, when we're going to choose places, which we are, where we think that the market is consistently available to, we think multifamily probably is the best basic investment right now as a vehicle, given the price of homes and the need for housing in general. And then one chooses the alternatives for how to satisfy that housing need on a national level. We see in the markets that we focus in, which have tended to be coastal, both on the East Coast and the West Coast and the Southeast. We think those are pretty stable markets. And as a base of business activity, we think that multifamily housing is probably part of our long-term base. We've historically done an awful lot of office space and a lot of mixed-use product that are based on office uses. And that market, we think there is a place for, but it's just really having a tough time finding its level. Retail, we again have experience historically in doing those projects. We found that whole retail distribution and how that's going to work in the 2025 to 2035 range is still the jury's out as to how that's going to work. And local retail that people talk about, where the food service and the groceries and the like are really probably still going to be there. Food service and gas stations and other things that you have to get locally. But we used to say that the drugstore was the base, and right now I'm not sure that people are going to be necessarily getting their pharmaceutical goods, and the drugstores have become small department stores, and so we're not as sure about that. The industrial market, um, there's this last mile theory of things. We think there are some opportunities there done properly. That is is a good sort of utility use, but we're focusing mostly on multifamily. As Brad indicated, it's going to be probably a mix of new construction and then taking existing opportunities to invest in those as income-producing properties. How much of that is going to be what they refer to as value added, where one takes an older product and brings it forward, as opposed to taking a product that's a bit newer and spending a little more judiciously on the improvements because they aren't as necessary to make the product feel contemporary. Um, is probably we're going to be focusing more on the newer product than some of the older product. So those are the areas that Republic is looking at right now.
I would tell you that the through line in real estate, I think, is being candid with the risk you're taking. Understand what you're doing, right? If you're investing with Republic and we're developing multifamily, Class A garden apartments, then you need to understand that that is a process that takes some amount of time to assemble that asset, and then you lease up and approach stabilization. If you're putting money out into developing a hotel, you're taking an entirely different kind of risk. You're really investing in a manager who can run the operations of a hotel and all its vagaries of staffing and equipment and selling those rooms nightly. Um, if you're building a building in Hawaii versus mainland United States, you're taking a different kind of risk. It's a different kind of market. Materials and supply may be your issue. The remoteness of the location, so access is an issue. Um, if you're investing in a grocery anchored shopping center, then you're kind of taking a credit risk in terms of how good is that grocer? Do I understand that that's a tried and true grocer, around here, a Giant or a Safeway or perhaps a Whole Foods or something? So to me, just if you're candid with yourself about the risk you're taking, it makes the investment underwriting and the contemplation of going forward in the investment much easier.
Well, I think building on what Brad had pointed out, it's um, if one builds a theater, you're really building a place for someone to do performances, and you're just a partner in that process. The multifamily has the advantage of a lot of diversity. Everyone sort of understands it. You need to understand how that multifamily product fits into the ecosystem. But if you're into retail environments or industrial buildings, you're really a partner in an operating business. If you invest in a hotel, it's really an operating business called a hotel that is financed as real estate. And so I understand how that works. It used to be that office buildings where you rented the space and didn't have to worry about it. Now you're really underwriting your tenants. And if the tenant's not there, uh, it won't work. I have one of our partners used to say there's nothing in commercial real estate that a good lease won't solve. Uh, and that's true in industrial and it's true in office uses. The beauty of multifamilies, it's really diversified, and it depending on where you are and what sector is, whether it's high end multifamily or whether it's just more mainstream workforce commodity uh, stuff, that there's an underlying background need, and you have the protections of diversity, and everyone sort of understands how those work. Some of the other real estate vehicles are more complicated, and as Brad indicates, you really need to understand how it fits into the ecosystem. As an investor, somebody wants to match their commitment of funds with their expectations and with what they can look forward and see. The investment horizon that someone has in a 2 or 3 year period is different than picking something that has to work over 10-year period to make it work. We think that matching of commitment, as Brad says, understand what you're getting into and how it fits within the ecosystem is really important. And one of the things that we try and emphasize, and when we're underwriting, is making sure that the investment horizon is understood. It doesn't necessarily do any good to do 30-year projections if your investment horizon is only 2 or 3 years, and then you plan to sell it. And similarly, if you're planning on building something that has to basically operate for a long period of time, then you maybe shouldn't be looking at the 2 or 3 year period, but you want to look in a long-term kind of horizon. It's that matching of expectations and resources and objectives that we think is important in any business environment.
We've had a wonderful experience with CrowdStreet, so we would absolutely do repeat business. Market conditions have been tough, but as that abates, we'll be looking to CrowdStreet again, to help us capitalize our deals. And so, tomorrow's always sunny, right? Tomorrow's bright.
Working with CrowdStreet has the advantage of really working with individual investors in a way that working with Prudential or a pension funds or with large Wall Street houses doesn't, where you're really separated from the investor. And so one of the things that we enjoy is really the opportunity to interchange with the investors who ask questions about things. We learn from some of those questions. We don't just teach, and gives us an opportunity to, I think, experience that in a way that you don't get when you're working with a large pension fund or their advisors, where their questions are screened and filtered. So I think that's something we enjoy and find advantageous. We think it's important and hope that CrowdStreet can stay nimble and have the ability to build on that opportunity to move quickly and to make decisions about things after going through a reasonable amount of due diligence and executing. So that's and we feel that platform over a period of time offers opportunities to work together that we wouldn't have if we just continued to work with large institutional investors.